Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to part 2 of interest groups. I am Miss Jennifer Blank, and I will be your guide on this journey. All right, so we are now going to get into the inner workings of interest groups and how precisely they do what it is that they do. Okay, so some fun things to note here. We need to ask the question, what makes an interest group successful? And in front of you, you see a list of particularly successful interest groups. Notice the National Rifle Association tops that list, closely followed by the American Association of Retired Persons, or AARP. So when, ladies and gentlemen, you're asking yourself, why don't we have more extensive gun regulation? Or why are Medicare and Social Security always going to be well funded where student loans are not, or student loan forgiveness is not? Look no further than numbers 1 and 2 on most successful interest groups list, okay? These folks spend a great deal of money and a lot of resources on making sure that their policies go into effect and that policies that don't work for them do not go into effect, okay? Those are the top 2. And you can take a look and see who these folks are, and it's just an interesting item to note. All right, so what makes an interest group successful? We have to have the discussion over large versus small groups. We're going to talk about this thing called the Freerider problem, the concern of intensity, financial resources, incentives, and of course, lobbying. So all of these factors contribute to how successful or unsuccessful an interest group can be or will be. So large groups actually don't tend to be as effective. This is somewhat of a surprise, right? I don't know, maybe it's not a surprise to you, but for most it's a surprise. You assume, the assumption is that large groups are going to be supremely effective, but not so much. Because you have the potential group. Everybody looks at the large groups. Oh, this is the potential. All the people who might be because they share this common interest. But there's a very large chasm that exists between the actual group and the potential group, okay? The actual group is the part of the potential group that actually join and actually do things, right? You ever see that? They join the groups and they don't do anything. It's like, oh yeah, I'm a member of this group, but they do nothing to further the group, right? They're just sort of there. That's what makes large groups ineffective, because you got a lot of people in it, but not a lot of people that do anything. And then there's also this issue of the collective good. This is something of value that can't be withheld from a group member. So you've got a lot of people who are reaping the benefits of an interest group, but not actively participating in making that group successful. So even when you do get some successes of a large group, everybody benefits as opposed to just the folks who actually did the work. It's kind of like a large-scale group project. So there's this Freerider problem. So some people don't join interest groups at all because they benefit from the group's activities, and they don't have to actually join it, right? The bigger the group, the larger the Freerider problem. The more members you have, the more free riders you are also going to have. Hence why, this is interesting, side note, but in teacher speak, teacher training, they tell us, 3 to 4 group members is the operative, right? Because if you get to 5 or 6 group members, you start to have this massive free rider problem that you can't control. So you want a tight-knit group where accountability is virtually built in, because without that accountability, you're not going to get the active participation. Large groups are also difficult to keep organized because there's so many moving parts. So small groups tend to be better organized, and they're more focused on the group's goals because the people that are participating are actively involved and invested in the success of these policy goals. Consumer groups usually have a difficult time getting policy gains because the benefits are spread over the entire population, and you're not getting the entire population to participate in your interest group. Groups that can provide selective benefits overcome this problem, right? So if you can make specific benefits only available to actively practicing contributing group members, you can overcome this issue. But if you can't do that, it's going to be a tough issue to overcome. So let's take a look. So these are some of the benefits of membership in AARP. So the number one benefit that people identify actually is keeping them informed about issues that matter to retired people in the United States. They also get discounts on insurance. They get significant representation in government and in lobbying capacity. There are other fringe benefits that are included, such as like some discount programs and things like that. There's publications, so they get literature, they get massive travel discounts, and there are also social reasons for being a part of it. But number one is information, right? So what else makes an interest group successful? Intensity. The intensity of the membership of their desire to achieve their policy goals. How strongly do they feel about it? Single issue groups tend to generate the most intensity, right? This isn't a surprise. This is otherwise known as say it with me, it's the F word that's appropriate for the classroom environment, faction. Faction, ladies and gentlemen. These are groups that focus on a narrow interest and they hate compromise. Groups also focus on emotional issues that provides them with a psychological advantage. If you can guilt people into being involved in it, you will be successful. Guilt is a very, very successful motivator. They also tend to be more likely to use protest and other means of political participation like boycotts than traditional interest groups that use lobbyists. Those folks operate under the radar. Protests and boycotts are much more public. Financial resources are a big factor. As we know, not all interest groups have equal amounts of money, right? Monetary donations usually translate into access to politicians. That access can take the form of a phone call, a meeting, something of that nature where you can actually directly speak with this politician who's going to propose a bill or vote on a bill. There's a bias towards the wealthier groups. Wealthier groups, however, don't always win in the policy arena. There are some examples of this that we're going to explore in class. Okay, so how do lobbyists influence government? They do these things, they influence government via the following methods: direct lobbying, testifying before Congress, socializing amongst their group members, and we're both within the group and without, political donations, political endorsements, court action, rallying of the members, and the most effective tool of all, propaganda. Everybody uses propaganda, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so lobbying, what is this? This is communication by someone other than a citizen acting on his own behalf. This communication is directed to a governmental decision maker with the hope of influencing his decision. Okay, that's the standard definition of a lobbyist. Okay. Hello, computer. Hello. There we go. Lobbyists are sources of information. They help politicians plan strategies for legislation and for re-election. Because remember, ladies and gentlemen, the number one goal of a political party or of a politician specifically is to get elected. And after they get elected, the number one goal becomes getting re-elected. Because you can't do anything unless you are actually serving in office, right? They provide ideas and innovations that can be turned into policies that politicians can then take credit for, making them look good. Also, of course, in turn, helping them with that election and re-election prospect. There are two basic types: lobbyists that are employed by a group or lobbyists that are hired temporarily. Okay, so you kind of have like lawyers operate like this too, where you have lawyers that you hire for particular reasons, and then there's this thing called on retainer, where corporations do this, where they have like corporate, tax lawyers and all kinds of other lawyers that work for them all the time, constantly. They are full-time employed, and so you have these two kinds of lobbyists as well. So shaping policy. Let's talk about shaping policy. They engage in electioneering. Electioneering, what on earth is that? That's direct group involvement with the election process. So many interest groups will engage in get out the vote efforts, right? They will engage in voter registration drives in an effort to get more of their like-minded folks to register to vote and hopefully vote. They form political action committees. These are used by interest groups to donate money to candidates. I mentioned political action committees, PACs, also super PACs in the previous video lesson, and we're going to discuss that in more detail when we get to elections. PACs actually help pay bills for increasing campaign costs, which those costs are largely due to the American public. You have to get the word out, and you have to get it out successfully, and you have to get it out in a particular way for particular groups of people. If you don't do that, you don't get elected. It is very, very, very easy to tick off lots of people in American politics, and so politicians spend copious amounts of money trying to avoid doing that. Most PAC money goes to incumbents, people who are running for re-election, because they already have skin in the game, and they are able to actively engage, whereas the challenger to the incumbent is only representative of potential. The incumbent can actually do things because they are in office. What else do they do? Litigation. This is where court cases come in. So if an interest group fails in one arena, the courts may be able to provide a remedy. They can do this by filing amicus curiae briefs. Amicus curiae is Latin for friend of the court. Briefs in court cases to support their position. So if a case is going to court, an interested group can provide this amicus curiae brief to supplement or as an addition to the existing court case to help win that battle. Class action lawsuits are also used to permit small groups of people to try to correct a situation that applies to a much larger group of folks. Going public. This is where groups try to cultivate a good public image. If the public views you as positive, they're more likely to support your goals. So in this case, it's not just about the issue, it's about who is speaking for the issue, right? So interest groups will try to get important celebrities or particularly influential folks to be the public face of their group. Because if the public can identify with that particular individual who's representing your group, they're more likely to support your policy goals. Okay, you can use marketing strategies, influencing public opinion of the group and its issues. Think push polls, ladies and gentlemen, in addition to social media advertisement and your more traditional cable news television advertisement as well. Groups purchase advertising to motivate the public about an issue, and this in turn also helps politicians who are campaigning on those same issues. It doesn't count as a direct contribution to that particular candidate, but it winds up working to help that candidate. Now let's look at types of interest groups. There are three primary types, all right? You have economic interests. These folks promote and protect the economic interests of their members. These tend to be the most powerful and the most effective. The next group is public interest. These range from consumer groups, religious groups, groups representing social justice causes, and single issue groups. These groups tend to be most powerful and effective. I tend to think it's because Americans have the attention span of a snow pea. So if you can get your message out very quickly, very efficiently, it's more likely to be listened to, heard, and adopted. But not necessarily, doesn't necessarily advance the best interests of the nation. Just happens to be most effective. And then finally, government interest groups. These groups typically represent state and local government interests at the federal level, but also foreign governments and businesses included in this type as well. So what else do we need to know about understanding, what else do we need to know about interest groups? Interest groups and democracy go hand in hand, or as I would like to say, constitutional republics. James Madison, we talked about this in Federalist 10, his solution to the problems posed by interest groups was to create a wide open system in which groups compete, right? That's the system of pluralism. Okay, remember, pluralism, competition. Lots of different groups competing effectively on a relatively level playing field, right? And not one group or a small number of groups have all the power. Elite theories look at the proliferation of business PACs, the massive increase in the number of business political action committees as evidence of interest group corruption, and they say, hey, this is how our elitist theory of interest groups is in action. This is how we prove that. Hyperpluralists maintain that group influence has led to policy gridlock. So we have the hyper importance of a number of interest groups, and it's basically stopping the work of government. And this is massively harming the democratic experiment for the world that we are still engaging in. So what do interest groups do? Let's review this. They seek to maintain policies and programs that benefit them, right? They continue to pressure government to do even more things. All right, this is, if you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to want a glass of milk. Okay, so not only are interest groups trying to maintain existing things that are good for them, they all want more. They always want more. So it's the politicians that are running for re-election. It's like, well, I did this for you. Yeah, what are you going to do for me in the next election, right? What are you going to do for me? If I help you get elected this term, what are you going to do for me next? You already did that for me. That's great. Thanks. What's next? Right? That's always going to be the case. They are never satisfied. So the key question that I want you to think about, and I'm going to leave you with this, and we're going to explore this question in class, is, as the government does more things, does that create the formation of more interest groups? And in turn, does that make the operation of government less successful? So thank you for hanging in there with me through this series of video lessons. I hope you folks learned what you needed to, and I will absolutely see you in the next video.